Good morning, I'm Taylor Wilson, and today is Thursday, July 17th, 2025. This is USA Today's The Excerpt. Today, the Senate passes another victory for Trump in Congress, plus what a new administration policy means for keeping immigrants detained longer, and a lawsuit deals with mailing handguns through the Postal Service. The Senate earlier today approved President Trump's plan for billions of dollars in cuts to funding for foreign aid and public broadcasting. It's his latest legislative win. Most of the cuts are to programs to assist foreign countries suffering from disease, war, and natural disasters, while the plan also eliminates all $1.1 billion the Corporation for Public Broadcasting was due to receive over the next 2 years. Standalone so-called rescissions packages have not passed in decades. Lawmakers have typically been reluctant to cede their control of spending, but Republicans in Trump's second term, who hold narrow majorities in the Senate and House, have shown little desire to resist the president's policies. Now that the Senate has signed off, the bill returns to the House, where lawmakers must approve the upper chamber's changes. They're expected to do so before an end-of-week deadline. You can read more throughout the day on usatoday.com. A new Trump policy will keep immigration detainees locked up longer. I spoke with USA Today national correspondent Trevor Hughes to learn more. Hello, Trevor.
Hey, good to be here.
Thanks for hopping on. So just what is this new Trump immigration policy? How does it change the existing detention landscape?
Really, this comes down to a difference between criminal court and immigration court. And criminal court, which most Americans are familiar with, maybe from Law and Order, operates differently than immigration court. And in immigration court, the administration controls basically everything: the judges, the prosecutors, the custody. And so they have a lot more power over exactly how things run. And in this case, what's happened is the Trump administration has essentially said, we are no longer going to hold bond hearings for detainees, which means they can no longer ask a judge to release them on personal recognizance or maybe a $50,000 bond or a $5,000 bond or even GPS monitoring while their immigration case is pending. So that means more or less, most of the people who get detained by immigration authorities now will stay in custody until their case is disposed of, either through a decision to release them back into the community with permission to remain or deportation.
And Trevor, what are you hearing from immigrant advocates about all this?
Well, there's a real concern that, this is a solution in search of an actual problem. Statistics show that something like 85-90% of people who are released on bond show up to their court hearings because, again, these are people who are being considered for release by judges. Many times they're being released with GPS monitors. These are not folks who are considered a danger to the community, right? Folks who are considered a danger are kept in custody. And so immigrant rights folks really are making the point that this is a loss of due process. We're locking up people who don't need to be locked up. They're not a flight risk. And it's sort of pulling apart families, pulling apart the people who are earning the money, and making it harder for people to fight their immigration cases.
Well, then, Trevor, if statistically they're not a flight risk, they're not, again, statistically speaking, committing crimes on a mass level, why does the Trump administration push for this?
Well, the Trump administration has been arguing for years that people who are living in this country without permission should not be living in this country without permission. And they've changed a lot of rules to increase the number of people targeted. But at the end of the day, the Trump administration's argument is if you want to live in America, you have to have come through the correct immigration process. And their argument is none of these folks did.
We should say that these detentions cost U.S. taxpayers as well, right?
Oh, they're terribly expensive. But again, it's really important to remember President Trump ran on a very specific platform of increased immigration enforcement. Everyone knew this would cost a lot more money. He said it would cost a lot more money. And the new federal spending plan contains billions of dollars to make that happen. Huge numbers of new ICE agents, huge numbers of new detention beds. But this is the priority of the current United States government.
Trevor Hughes is a national correspondent with USA Today. Thank you, Trevor.
You bet.
President Trump has signed a law that extends tougher prison sentences for fentanyl trafficking, surrounded by relatives of people who died from overdoses and lawmakers who approved the bill.
We'll be getting the drug dealers, pushers, and peddlers off our street, and we will not rest until we have ended the drug overdose epidemic.
The law places fentanyl on the Drug Enforcement Administration's list of most serious drugs with no accepted medical use and a high potential for abuse. The list includes drugs such as heroin, cocaine, and LSD. Fentanyl has been temporarily assigned to the Schedule 1 category since 2018. The law makes the designation permanent. It also makes permanent mandatory minimum penalties of 5 years in prison for trafficking 10 grams of fentanyl and 10 years for 100 grams. A Texas judge has rescheduled the execution of a death row inmate who won a rare stay of execution last year as prison officials were poised to administer his lethal injection. The judge set Robert Robertson's execution for October 16th, almost exactly a year after the Supreme Court in the state granted him a stay on his last execution day. Robertson is imprisoned in the 2002 death of his 2-year-old daughter, Nikki, despite strong evidence that suggests he is innocent. He was convicted based on shaken baby syndrome, which has since been largely debunked. Last year, with hours left to live, Robertson's life was spared following an effort by a bipartisan group of Texas lawmakers. We explored this case last year in a special episode of The Excerpt. The lead investigator in Robertson's case, Brian Warden, told me that Robert is a completely innocent man and they got it wrong.
Robert is a completely innocent man and we got it completely wrong because we were looking for the wrong things.
You can go back and listen to or watch that episode with a link in today's show notes. Two gun organizations are challenging a 1927 law prohibiting mailing handguns through the Postal Service. Gun Owners of America and Gun Owners Foundation, together with Pennsylvania resident Bonita Shreve, have filed a lawsuit in the Western District of Pennsylvania against the U.S. Postal Service. Shreve wants to mail her father a handgun as a gift, according to the filing, but is prohibited by federal law and Postal Service regulations. In their filing, the plaintiffs argue the Postal Service allows businesses and government officials to ship handguns and that individual Americans should be able to do the same. Private shipping companies like UPS and FedEx have policies prohibiting shipping a handgun. A spokesperson for the Postal Service said it is USPS policy not to comment on pending litigation. President Trump is amping up pressure on Fed Chair Jerome Powell. I caught up with USA Today reporter Andrea Riccier for more and a look at how investors are reacting. Thanks for joining me, Andrea.
Sure. Always a pleasure.
All right, so how is President Trump amping up the pressure on Fed Chair Jerome Powell?
Trump has been putting the pressure on the Fed chair ever since the start of this year, as he was inaugurated for his second term. But what's been going on over the past couple of weeks is that he's sort of started to enlist other people to bring the pressure. His budget director is one example. Other congressional Republicans are another example. In speaking with reporters, the president initially seemed to suggest that he was really getting ready to fire Jerome Powell, but then also sort of walked it back a little and sort of seemed to deflect some of that back onto congressional Republicans, saying, I wouldn't fire him, but when I polled members of Congress, they all said they would fire him.
Well, you mentioned congressional Republicans. I mean, what do we hear from lawmakers on this? Trump clearly is saying that at least some Republicans support firing him.
So another example is not just congressional Republicans, but Bill Pulte, who is the director of FHFA, the Federal Housing Finance Agency, which regulates Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. Again, the Office of Management and Budget Director, who, among other things, is talking about a headquarters renovation. The Fed has been spread among several different buildings in Washington, D.C. This renovation was planned for years and years and years, actually even pre-pandemic. And it's actually seen as a long-term money saver because it's going to modernize a lot of buildings, which we've also heard from other Trump administration agencies, that they're working in very old, very dated, in some cases slightly unsafe buildings. So this was the Fed's very well vetted effort to modernize, streamline, and cut costs. But like just about any construction project you've ever heard of, it has gone over budget. This spans the pandemic period when, things were very difficult. The cost of labor was crazy. The cost of getting materials into the country was awful. So it's not surprising that this big project had cost overruns, but now it's sort of being used as a political tool to say Powell's overseeing this project that's just gone completely amok. That's important because in order to be fired, in order to be removed from his seat as Fed chair, there has to be cause. And so the idea is, while this is a very political step, it is seen as one step towards firing for cause.
Andrew, is this new terrain, the idea of a president pressuring the central bank in this way?
It's not new at all. President Nixon apparently rode hard on his Fed chair. President Lyndon Johnson really wanted to bring interest rates down when he was fighting a war in Vietnam. What is different, at least what my sources have told me, is that Trump, as we know, does things very publicly. In some cases, some people say that there is a private Trump who will often reassure people to their face and be friendly and polite and professional in one-on-one or small group settings, but then he kind of lashes out in public.
How is all this landing with either Powell himself or just kind of inside the Fed more broadly?
So my sense is that Powell is just sort of keeping his head down and trying to be professional and, stay above the fray. He has said publicly that he will not resign. Nobody knows if he could be forced into something. He probably doesn't even know what kind of pressure could be coming from the White House. But one sort of telling moment came a couple days ago when the Fed put out a big response to these critiques about the headquarters that we just talked about. They went through a FAQ, a frequently asked questions, about the renovations and pointed out what I just said. This was approved, it was vetted. Yes, there are cost overruns, but there's very good reasons for it. And ultimately, it should save taxpayer money. And so, a lot of people watching this think that this is the Fed sort of being really forced to respond, being backed into a corner, as it were.
Well, all eyes are on the markets and investors. How have investors been reacting?
So markets yesterday did have an initial response to this discussion. Both stocks and bonds sold off when Trump was initially talking around the idea that Powell could be fired. But then when he clarified and sort of walked it back a little bit, assets recovered. What we have not seen yet is we've not seen the kind of big freak out that we saw, for example, in April after the tariffs were first rolled out, that really caused politicians to sit up and take notice. And, so I wrote a piece saying, who knows when we'll see that, but we're not there yet.
Another interesting piece from you, Andrea, USA Today reporter Andrea Riccier. Thanks for stopping by.
Thank you, Taylor.
And coming up later this afternoon, what if your hospital room had a view of trees instead of a parking lot? Turns out it could change your recovery.
People with the view of the park-like setting got out of the hospital faster, used less painkillers, and had less post-op complications.
Public health expert Dr. Jay Maddock joins my colleague Dana Taylor to share the surprising health benefits of greening our medical spaces. Catch that conversation today, beginning at 4 p.m. Eastern Time, right here on this feed. And thanks for listening to The Excerpt. You can get the podcast wherever you get your audio. And as always, you can email us at podcasts@usatoday.com. You can find a link to that email in today's show notes. I'm Taylor Wilson. I'll be back tomorrow with more of The Excerpt from USA Today.